Hello and welcome to the Overland Journal podcast. I am your host, Scott Brady, and for this week's conversation, we're going to go into the principles of overlanding, building a 70 Series Land Cruiser. The 70 Series Land Cruiser is iconic, and it is currently the gold standard for around-the-world vehicle builds. And this is because the vehicle is not only extremely durable, but it's also exceptionally reliable. And in various forms, it's also very easy to live and operate out of, including in very technical terrain. Personally, I've used 70 Series Land Cruisers around the world. We used a 78 Series to take the same four-wheel drive to all 7 continents with the Expedition 7 trip. So we go into my experience with the 70 Series, but this conversation would be incomplete without an expert on the subject. And for that, we have Paul Marsh. Paul is extremely experienced with the 70 Series, and he understands a lot of the weaknesses of the platform. So he talks at length about how to prepare a 70 Series for long distance travel, the systems that he uses, the issues in the vehicle that he addresses in various ways. But we really take a pragmatic approach, a very simple approach towards the vehicle because it benefits from not being overbuilt despite its capacity for load. This is a very important conversation about a very important vehicle, so please enjoy our principles of overlanding, building a 70 Series Land Cruiser.
And a special thanks to Rocky Talkies for their support of this week's podcast. Rocky Talkies are backcountry radios designed by a small team in Denver. The radios are extremely rugged, easy to use, and compact, weighing in at just under 8 ounces. They have a range of 1 to 5 miles in the mountains and up to 25 miles line of sight. The batteries will last from 3 to 5 days, and you can recharge them easily via USB-C right in the vehicle. Our team uses Rocky Talkies, and we also used them recently at the Overland Expo. The next Overland Expo, stop into our booth and say hello and check out the radios for yourself. And as a listener of the Overland Journal podcast, you can get 10% off a pair by going to rockytalkie.com/Overland Journal. Thanks again, Rocky Talkie.
So thank you, Paul Marsh, for being on the podcast again. For those that are listening, you can listen to Paul's story and a lot of his advice in general around overlanding in one of our previous podcasts. But today we're going to go through the principles of overlanding, building a 70 Series Land Cruiser. And if I was to say, if there was a single vehicle that I had the most respect for in overlanding, it would be a 70 Series Land Cruiser. For me personally, I've trusted my life to those models on 7 continents, and I've owned many 70 Series, and they have been a source of joy and dependability and adventure for me throughout the last couple decades. So let's start off with, what was your first experience with a 70 Series that's notable that you remember?
Scott, it's such an interesting story, and thank you for having me on the podcast again. It's great to be able to connect with you and see you after so many years that we haven't seen each other.
I know. Although it seems like it was just yesterday. And that's a 70 Series story
that's
too,
a 70 Series
which we'll get to.
So I done my trip through Africa and came back into Botswana where I was living. And I had my eye on a 70 Series Troopy, well, a 78, but it was an old one. It was left-hand drive, and I just saw this truck, and I just knew I had to own this truck. But I couldn't quite afford it, and then it was a question of how was I going to buy this truck. And, I have a firm belief that if you visualize something, you can create anything that you want.
Yeah.
And I absolutely use it day in, day out. I use it with my hobbies. I fly paramotors, and I visualize my training. I'm so
that is like our do South Africans get a paraglider, like paramotor sailor when they're born?
No, when you're born.
It's like it's part of the
package is the paraglider, and then when you can walk, you get the paramotor.
And then you're christened in a cage with a great white or something like that.
It's near enough, yeah. And we pretend not to be too rugged.
That is so funny. That is such a common thing for South Africans, for sure.
It's true, I guess, in a way. But yeah, so visualizing is really powerful. And then this was a dream. I wanted this truck. And a friend of mine who I'd known for a long time, and he said, listen, you know what? Let's build this truck up together. Let's build this amazing truck. And I've come back from this amazing expedition, 1.5 years traveling through Africa.
And that was in a Hilux, wasn't it?
It was in a Hilux,
Yeah.
you know. So a Hilux, a simple Hilux, solid axle in the front. Okay, it had all leaf springs. But it was a strong, trusty truck. They're not strong as in solid for a lot of weight, but it was a reliable vehicle.
Sure.
You know, what I broke on it was through ignorance and overweight and
Sure.
mistakes I made. But seeing that and knowing that the next truck we could have would need to be something stronger, something that could really just pound those hard roads. You know, when you drive on some of the roads and the corrugations are endless, and you know this poor vehicle's taking an absolute beating. You know, you're looking for a truck that's going to be solid.
That's right.
Simple,
That's
a simple, solid, reliable truck.
That's right.
If I can put it back to that. And, you know, the 70 series has got a lot of value in what they have. I guess the Troopy is one of my favorite trucks.
Yeah.
The truck behind us is a Troopy, and we build a lot of Troopies for clients. You know, people can live inside and out of a Troopy.
It's such a unique configuration,
Yeah.
and it was the vehicle that we chose for Expedition 7. Greg and I did. Was
And
the
a good
78.
choice, really,
Yeah.
because I mean, you built that and adapted it to cater for a lot of different scenarios.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, when I look at all the vehicles that are available, and you know, I have owned a lot of them, different ones, in times in my life. Currently, I have 280s, which I'm very passionate about. But
Good ride
Troopy,
quality, yeah.
Yeah, they're good. The 80s are different, and they're a great. It's a classic vehicle, and I guess that's part of what I like about it. But you know, when we build the Troopies, there's a lot of value in how you can build it, because what you're doing is you're creating a small home, and this small home takes you to the remote places you want to go and explore. And the challenge is to build it in a way that you can use it in a comfortable way. You can get what you need. You're not going to be sitting on top of each other. So you've got a very limited space. I mean, you know, the vehicle's not wide. It's not too long. You're sleeping in it. You could eat in it. You could, you know, I guess in Africa, you live more around the vehicle and outside because the weather's good. When the weather's bad, you're confined to the truck.
You can find some respite for sure.
Yeah.
And so that was your first one. And the first time that I ever drove a 70 series was when I had the amazing fortune of being sponsored to race in the Outback Challenge in Morocco, in Africa. And Patrice Ryder,
Yes, I know Patrice.
a wonderful human being, took a huge chance on me. George Carusos, also from Extreme Outback in the United States, who's the one who introduced me to Patrice. But Patrice basically said he wanted to bring over an American driver that could also generate some content, and he handed me the keys to a PZJ 73 with 35-inch tires and a fast winch and a good suspension, and that was my first exposure to driving a
That's capable.
and that was in 2006, and it was so early on in my travels. I mean, I had really not traveled to Europe other than when I went there in the military, and I actually just didn't even know if France was right or left-hand drive. I can't remember. I couldn't remember. I didn't know. I just didn't. This was so early days for me, and the things that 70 series endured in race conditions, very technical conditions, you know, technical terrain, winching, everything else like that. Unbelievable how strong they are.
And that's the thing. I think, you know, you hit the nail on the head there. They're strong.
Yeah.
They're strong. They've got a ladder chassis. It's a strong chassis. You know, good engines. The Toyota engines have always been good. Maybe a bit underpowered in certain circumstances, but
I think that's what makes them reliable.
they're reliable. Yeah. You know, you drive to the place and you have probably the best vehicle you could have wandering around the bush.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take away, you get great vehicles all around, you know. It just, in particular, I think if I have to look at Africa as a footprint, and probably Australia too, the Toyota has dominated that platform in a big way. And I think, you know, thanks to Toyota, they've done a lot of work on putting dealerships and supply. But the reality goes down to the reliability.
It does.
If I spoke to hunters in Africa, when I went through Africa on my big trip, the initial one, I was fascinated with the weak points of vehicles.
Yeah.
So I'd stop off at Toyota dealerships, hunting camps,
Sure.
wherever I could find, what are the problems on the trucks? And I got to learn what the weaknesses were.
Sure.
And the 70 series had very few weaknesses. I mean, you'd see them if they were tired, and I find when I see today...
Tired means
half a
million kilometers.
Well, they kind of run in at about 100,000, maybe more,
Yeah.
And I genuinely mean that, if you take these engines and you drive them, people cringe when you say, I've taken a vehicle of 500,000 kilometers. I'm going to build it into a truck.
Yeah.
I'm going actually, if it's not burning oil and it's not smoking, and do the injectors and put a timing belt pump on,
Sure.
it's going to keep going. So
And they do.
they do, yeah. But I think, if you look at sort of the workhorse of Africa, the Land Cruiser has to be one of the vehicles that's very respected in that field.
And I believe that a lot of travelers, their primary consideration around a vehicle is reliability. I don't want it to break down on me in the middle of nowhere. And if I do have a problem, I want to be able to service it. So that's where Toyota has such an advantage, because it is the least likely to fail.
Yes.
And then if it does, there are Toyota dealerships around the world that oftentimes sell the same vehicle, particularly if you're doing long overland trips. If you're in South America, you're going to be able to get parts for 70 series. If you're in South Africa, you're going to be able to get parts for 70 series. Same with Australia or anywhere else that really comes to mind. For the most part, there are very few markets that don't sell that vehicle, other than in North America, which is so sad. So sad.
That's so sad. Yeah.
It's not Toyota's fault. There's you and me and Greg Miller and about 15 other guys
who want one
that would really buy one.
Yeah.
They're just, and that, I guess it is also important for us, for those that are listening, it's important to talk about the downsides of the 70 series, which
absolutely.
the one that really stands out to me is that it is not, you talk a lot about, is it safe? Is it reliable? And for me, one of the challenges of the 70 series is it's a less safe car on the road.
Yes. Yeah.
It is much higher center of gravity. It's a very narrow track. They've kept the track fairly similar to the Land Cruisers throughout history. So the braking is a little underpowered. Then you also run into the problem where the rear axle is a different track width than the front, which can actually create dynamic situations, especially in mud and ruts.
And you feel it. You actually feel it. And I think that's that's the challenge. Yes, you can overcome that problem a few different ways.
Yeah.
And there's no right or wrong solution to that. It's about how you approach it.
Yeah.
But the point is, in my mind, that should have been fixed long ago by Toyota.
It should have been.
They widened the front axle to accommodate the V8.
Yep.
At that point, they should have widened the axle at the rear.
Yep.
And Toyota, if you're listening, widen the rear axle.
Yeah.
We're tired of having to make compromises and fix it.
Yeah.
So that's probably the one. Is it a downside? Yes, it is a bit of a downside. Is it a weakness? Yes, because if you're going to repair that axle width correction, you've only got a couple of ways to do it. You're either going to fit an axle that's made wider, and now you limit the same problem with if you break something or damage something, you can't repair it.
That's right.
You need special parts, a longer drive shaft, that goes through. And if you put spacers on, which is an option, you've got to be very responsible at how you manage and look after it, because
constantly making sure that they're to torque.
Exactly. And that, people question the whole what's right and wrong. There isn't a right and wrong. It's about, are you going to manage it responsibly? It's like scuba diving. I taught scuba diving for years, and I always said to people, it's the safest sport until you break a rule. Okay?
Sure.
Break the rule and you'll die. Simple.
Yeah, very good chance you'll die. Yeah, that's right.
Exactly. So, when you look at what can go wrong, we manage that. As you say, it's narrower. It's got
higher center of gravity.
Center of gravity. So again,
the ride quality isn't quite that of, like, if you were to take a 200 series Land Cruiser, it would be safer. It would be just as reliable. It would be safer for sure.
They're not as practical to build up.
That's the challenge. They have less interior space.
And
they're more
expensive,
electronics, they're more complicated. Yeah.
So what you've got with the what we're still quite fortunate about in South Africa is we can still buy these trucks with a very basic engine. The classical 1HZ engine is a beautiful engine because it's reliable and it will do.
Normally aspirated, and that's important for people to know. There's no turbo. And in general, although you will hear significant banter on the internet about people who will turbo these engines, in general, it's not a good idea.
Yeah, the thing is, we've done it. When you do something like that, again, it's a massive responsibility on the driver. You put everything in place to try and make sure that you mitigate any danger or damage to the engine. Ultimately, you will damage the motor in some way.
That's right.
So it's better if you had a choice. I mean, what we do and have done is we've taken some of the older engines because we want the simplicity. So we've taken engines out of the 80 series, the 12 1HDT motor or the 24 valve 1HT FT motor, both mechanical injection pumps, and we've dropped them into the Troopy. Now you've got a turbo diesel, and you can put it back to permanent four-wheel drive, stronger gearbox. So the 70 series, these Troopies, they had some weaknesses in the gearbox. I think if you bought a brand new truck, in the lifetime you own it, you probably wouldn't notice that. If you've bought an old one, we always pull the boxes apart to inspect them, and that's probably when you do the sort of upgrades.
Yeah, sure. And when we drove the 78s in Expedition 7, we had a single failure in the entire trip, and it was not a reliability issue. It was actually the brush on the canning stock route actually wore down the wiring on the rear locker solenoid. It actually ground it down until they shorted out and it stopped working. So it wasn't even a piece of plastic in 80,000 kilometers and 7 continents with those vehicles. Unbelievable the reliability of that platform and the interior space, like you talk about, because we slept inside the vehicles. So being able to sit upright inside of a wagon. You also remove the passenger rear doors, which saves weight. It gives the structure better integrity. It actually improves a little bit of security, particularly if you go with a wagon, with a van style.
Yeah. Well, it is very much. You've got the two front doors, two doors at the back here. And so you're quite right. You don't have as much accessibility.
Yeah.
But when you're building a vehicle, these are built for 2 people.
Yeah.
So, you're not building it for 3 or 4. And if you are, it's a compromise. So
and we done it. We had it compromised.
Yeah.
We kept the rear seats so we can take passengers. Yeah.
And, there isn't, people often ask, what is the most ideal vehicle you could possibly have? There isn't one. Okay. Because your needs and the needs. So you've got to learn to be flexible. So, and that also comes in a number of ways. These have 2 fuel tanks, so they're 2 90-liter fuel tanks, which is fantastic.
Fantastic.
Do you need more fuel than that? You don't. And if you do, for one small trip, or one big trip, should we say, take a few jerry cans. Yeah. Add it into the tank and probably give those cans away. And you don't have to worry about it.
You're done with it.
And then water, what we've done in this particular one, we've actually rotomolded our own water tanks. So we've got water tanks in the cavities. So left and right cavities is 25 liters on each side.
Perfect.
And a 50-liter tank at the back behind the rear tank. So now all the water, 100 liters of water and 20 liters in a lifesaver jerry can, gives us enough water capacity. So you've got enough water and enough fuel. Those are your 2 heavy payloads. And these can carry the payload. So if you have to, there's 3 different models, or 4 actually. If you've got the 79 single cab, double cab 79, you've got the 76 wagon, which is similar to this with 4 doors.
Yeah. And it's a nice car.
It's a nice car because it's well balanced. The roof's not quite as high. You can build it out for 2 people.
A little bit shorter wheelbase.
200 millimeters shorter. So your roof sleeping capacity is a bit shrunk. Here in South Africa, a couple of companies do roof conversions for them. So you can still cut the roof off and put a roof where you can access it from inside. So the one advantage of building a vehicle like this 76 Troopy is that you can have access to your sleeping accommodation from inside. For some people, that's really valuable. You come down at night, you can have a portaloo in the middle of the aisle. You don't have to get out the truck. Basically, you could sit down, you could make a coffee. So that's the one way of looking at it.
It definitely, from my experience, it seems to be the most common long trip 2-person platform is the 78. And then you can even get a 70, which is a 2-door short wheelbase. And those are super charming.
They're great. They're rare to find the old ones.
Very rare, super charming. And then for a period of time, they made a mid-wheelbase. So they made a 73 and a 74. Yeah, I raced the 73. I owned a 74 with a 13 BT.
Yeah.
And we drove that for the longest time, right-hand drive. We got it out of Japan. And then they even had the light-duty 70 series. Yes. So they had a 71 and a 77. So, no, actually a 78. I had an LJ 78. So it had like basically Hilux or 4Runner drivetrain in it, the small 2LTE diesel light-duty 5-speed. It had the heavy-duty Land Cruiser transfer case, but then it had the light-duty Hilux axles. So that was another variant of the 70 series. So there's so many, but if you're looking to buy something used to travel yourself or with one other person, I tend to push people towards the 78. Would you feel like that's...
I think for two people, it's probably one of the vehicles that you could take. There's two things to consider, and I'll ask the question to my clients. I go, are you wanting to travel out of Africa? Okay, because if you want to go to South America, you're going to need a turbo motor in some form.
Because of the elevation?
Because of the elevation. Yeah. So, if you drive the 1HZ, and we can't in South Africa get the petrol version of these, and we can't get the V8 version of this. Now, I'm not going to knock the V8, but the V8 is a sensitive engine with the fuel quality of fuel you have. So you have to be much more careful with the
We experienced that. We would have to change filters much more often.
Yeah. You're changing filters more often. You've got to, manage your fuel, check the fuel quality and that. So if they're not traveling to South America, then, the 1HZ is not going to be fast. Right. You're going to know that when you're coming up behind a big truck, you may not have the power to overtake as you'd like, but it's never going to let you down. And the clients we've actually swapped engines out and done those conversions here gives them that extra power, which is very nice, but it's an expense. It's quite an expense. Do you need it? Yeah. It's a lot of money to add into a car. So I'm very happy to drive the 1HZ naturally aspirated.
Slows me down.
It slows me down.
Yeah. Slows me down.
And then you kind of don't.
And that's safer. I mean, those V8 78s, I mean, we were doing the equivalent of 160 kilometers an hour in North American roads. Yeah. And those are checks that chassis may not be able to cash.
Yeah.
So I actually think that the 1HZ is so well paired.
It's well paired,
for the engine or for the vehicle, because it just slows you down. 80 kilometers an hour becomes the new 160.
And it's so when we look at a truck like this, and there's a new one outside actually for one of our clients, and then you look at the new one, and then you look at what we've done to it, and the process of going from the basic out of the factory truck to something that's sitting behind us is a fair process. So I break it down into phases. So there's phase 1, which you're going to do the exterior bolt-ons.
And what do you normally focus on for the exterior bolt-ons?
Well, we'll always put a bull bar, okay?
And what are your thoughts around bull bar? What are some of the brands you like, or what are some of the key
thing
features that you're looking for?
Bull bar is really about, has it been well manufactured? So I don't want it to rust, okay? And has it been tested? That's another thing.
So the airbag's still...
Airbag, if it's fitted with airbags, it must still work, and not everyone can vouch for that. So that's important. It's the question is it good to have a bull bar or not good? Well, it's going to save your vehicle if you're in the middle of nowhere and you hit an animal.
Sure.
Okay, and that's for sure. So if it relies on you getting out with your vehicle and being safe, that's one safety feature you're putting on.
Sure.
It's like anything, how you drive your vehicle responsibly. You can have a normal bump on, you trash your vehicle and you've got a problem. But the bull bar is something we do fit.
Sure.
So bull bar, underbody protection, the rear bumper at the back.
And do you always fit a winch to the bull bar?
No, not at all. It depends where the client's going. Not everyone
needs a winch. If you're going in the desert, you really don't need a winch.
Well, exactly. Yeah. You're hooking up to. There's not many trees around.
And usually a set of Max Tracks does the trick.
So. Max Tracks, a high lift jack and a shovel are my go-to. And I always say to folk, if you've got a set of Max Tracks, a high lift jack, a wheel lift that you can hook on. A wheel lift is something you hook on the wheel and you jack up the wheel and axle together. You're jacking the high lift jack from the side and not from the back or front, which means you don't lift the whole body up. You lift the axle, and then you can. So effectively, if your vehicle's bogged down to the chassis and to the axles, you want to lift that up before you start trying to winch it out and get it out, especially if it's in the mud. So those bits of kit and knowing how to use it. High lift's got really bad press, and you get the more modern hydraulic versions of the high lift jack, which are really good. But learn to use that. It's a tool. It's a tool that is invaluable in recovery. So learn to use it safely.
And it can even be used for winching or to complement a winching operation.
Yeah. You're gonna, and again, if you understand how that can happen and be used, so that another vehicle is better than a winch because you've got so much more flexibility, backwards, forwards, whatever. But do you have enough length on your rope, on your tow rope or your tow strap? If your tow strap's 10 meters, quite often we'll take a synthetic winch cable and we'll just put two eyes,
make it an extension,
and make a much longer extension.
Sure.
To pull something. So
and they're lightweight and they're very compact. Yeah.
Exactly that. So, when you're looking at recovery and how you're going to recover a vehicle, your question is, do you need a winch? Well, no, but it's certain people, if they said to me, I'm going to go through West Africa and I'm going to get engaged in a lot more mud and stuff, well, it's like an insurance policy. Hopefully you don't use it.
Yep.
If you've got it, you may need it. But yes, would you put it on? Yeah.
And I find that in scenarios like that, you can really help locals. You can people have slid off the road, and then you're not exposing your vehicle to so much stress and strain doing a recovery. You can just slow things down, use the winch, pull the vehicle back up onto the road. You've done a good deed.
And it's nice to do.
Absolutely.
But I think
and sometimes they're blocking the road and it's the only way through. You got to get them out.
You're going to help them. And that's always the case when you're traveling. You know how many times you've helped someone.
Yeah, for sure.
But then again, know how to use the equipment safely.
Yeah.
A winch is very dangerous if you don't know how to use it safely.
Yeah, the loads are...
and then, people are hooking winches up and expecting them to pull a car up where it shouldn't be pulled out. They're going to pull the bumper off.
Yep.
So to go back to what we do, you bolting on something on the front so to protect the car. Your suspension is carrying the weight of the car. So you're really going to calculate that out. And are you putting, a suspension which is parabolic suspension, has a place in the market? Absolutely. It's a little bit more comfortable. It's coming out, it's more favored, and some of the guys like the ride of a parabolic suspension as opposed to a normal leaf suspension. But you've got to get the suspension right.
You do.
Too high, too hard, it doesn't work. So, if people understand the springs are there to carry the weight correctly, balanced out with the shock absorbers. And I've seen a lot of people request the most fancy, most expensive shock absorbers that they never learn how to adjust properly. So, again, if you're fitting a suspension that's a specialized suspension, do you need it? Don't you need it?
And making sure that suspension is serviceable or that it has a long service life.
Yeah.
A lot of the race suspensions, they're designed for a race or two, and then to be rebuilt. And you don't want to try to do that in the middle of nowhere. And you definitely don't want to change the suspension where stock components can no longer be fitted, because if you break a coil spring and you're in the middle of Zambia, it's a good chance you can find a stock 70 series spring, and maybe you're sitting a little low in a corner, but you can make it to the next city to DHL in a replacement or something like that. You can actually get something. So you want to really avoid customization on the suspension, custom shocks.
Shocks. There are guys who do some remote reservoir shock absorbers. Some of them are absolutely great. Do you need them? Well, it's going to improve the ride for sure.
Well, and then they just have so much more fluid volume, so they're less likely to fade and everything.
Less likely, and but again, have you carried spare bushes?
Yeah, exactly.
So when you're looking at what you're doing to the vehicle, at the same time, you've got to look at, if it's an older vehicle, what are we replacing, and what spares can I keep from the old parts I've taken off?
Yeah. And
what spares do I need to replace and carry without carrying too much? Because the whole thing is weight. So your aim is to keep the vehicle, to get the load, and load, as we all know, as low as possible, to keep that center of gravity low.
For sure.
As we all know, that's important.
Especially on a 70.
Yeah, the double cabs are worse in the fact that the double cabs don't carry the weight as well. They tend to sit nose up. And you're putting a lot of springs on the back because you've got a great big fuel tank behind the rear axle. Generally, rear bumper, 2 spare wheels. So you've got that. Here in South Africa, some of us, the clients will extend the chassis, and then you can put the spare wheels behind the cab between the load bin and the cab.
Makes sense.
So that brings your weight further forward, which is what you're trying to balance that out. So getting the vehicle to drive properly, and also tire choice. Now, I've watched people, do you go for steel rims or alloy rims? Question.
What's your preference?
Well, if someone's going out of Southern Africa, definitely steel rims. Within Southern Africa, you're going to find a pretty good tire place. You're carrying two spares. There's nothing wrong with alloy rims. You might damage them a bit if you use a wheel lift on them, but they balance up well, and you've spent the money on them already. So they're good. They're strong enough,
Especially like a factory Toyota.
Factory Toyota, I'm talking about factory.
They're quite strong. Yeah.
They are, and they're light and they're good. Once you're going further north, you're going to find that often if you have to repair a tire, it's not always with a machine. Using two tire levers.
Yeah.
And then you can damage the rim, and then it does
for sure.
Seal. So, when people come and do training, we'll teach them how to plug tires, I actually pack in patches to repair the sidewalls.
Sure.
Knowing that they may not do it themselves, but a guy who can fix tires might be able to repair the tire sidewall. And if it's a temporary fix as a spare, it's a chance.
Gets you to your next city. Yeah.
And then the rear bumper is important if you're going to fit a rear bumper, because a lot of aftermarket products, some of them are not all expedition designed for serious expedition. So you need to understand, am I actually building this truck to go on an extreme expedition where I'm going to be using this truck and getting in it for a year-long trip? And that's going to influence the different products that I would choose for the truck. And there I'm based on the quality of the product, what are the chances of something breaking? And if it does break, is that a weakness in the product? And that you're not going to find that in all the sales guys.
You don't.
For sure.
You find it from talking to other people.
Some people will say, that's the rack I don't want because of this weakness, or you repair it and you just make stronger.
Sure.
It's also okay.
And what's the rear bumper that we have here on this 70?
So this is one of my favorite rear bumpers. This is made here locally in South Africa. It's made by GoBX. GoBX is a company I have a lot of time and respect for. It's owned by Chris Ingram and Shane Garcia. And these guys, Chris is the founder member, and they've built a fantastic company. This particular bumper, they've developed bumpers for most of the vehicles, all the 70 series. They've got some front bumpers they've developed. They've got underbody protection. Their wheel carriers are, if you want to test a product, give it to the hire companies.
Sure.
Because we know hire companies, people who drive the trucks either don't have the experience or don't care. So your products, if it's going to break, it's going to break on a hire company.
For sure.
So I'm always kind of, and these have been through the mill. These guys have refined their product. And again,
it looks good. You can even see that Delrin pad that the swing out slides up on looks quite robust.
So it's got a gas shock, and it holds itself open. They've got service kits for them. So, when I look at products like in South Africa, if it wasn't available in my country, would I import it? Well, I'd see what's available, because whatever's available is going to be your best line of getting service and help. As long as it's built and it's going to last. So anything we're bolting onto the truck, you're looking and saying, will it last the longevity of the expedition or the lifetime of what I'm doing? And can I service it, and can I get spares and help if I need some support?
And your primary goal with the rear bumper is to fit a second spare.
2.
Yeah,
okay, so there's always that debate. Do I take 1 or 2 spare wheels?
Yeah.
Well, just think about it. You're middle of nowhere. You use your spare.
Yeah.
You're high and dry if you haven't got a second spare.
Sure.
So then you're looking for a garage.
Again,
if something happens again. And we always say it doesn't, but hell, I've had trips where I've used up both spares and more.
Yeah.
And you probably have. And not often. Maybe it's 5%, maybe even not even as much as that. So it's the what if.
Yeah.
And do I take the risk or don't I?
And the 70 has the payload to be able to take the second.
Yeah, it does.
Spare tire.
And I think with most vehicles, if you can look at where your balance is on safety, that would be a high criteria for me, that I know I've got good tires and I can repair them. Or I'm going to be prepared to pull the tire with tire levers and fix it and put a tube in to reinflate it if I have to.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, that said.
And I also really like a front and rear bumper, because one of the realities of traveling in unique places or developing places is that you're in the cities, and getting in accidents happens.
Yeah.
And by having these big bumpers on your vehicle, it does inspire a bit of respect by the locals.
Absolutely.
They do give you a little bit more space when they're staring at that bull bar on the front.
Oh, that's true.
So I think that's one of the other advantages of a bumper is those minor fender benders, or when you're parked along a road and somebody, mismanages the clutch and they roll into the back of your vehicle. You may not even notice that it happened other than their paint on your bumper. Yeah. So I do like that too. It's insurance.
I mean, I've got a client who, in testing his brand new truck like this, and he had a big accident. It wasn't his fault. Massive big accident. Had it not had a front bull bar, it would have written the car off.
Wow.
Just built the car like this. So I don't want to tell you the amount of money spent on it. Right off. Test trip before you've started.
Wow.
So, again, we're looking at you taking a truck, which is your home, and you're putting all your safety and everything in there. You want to make sure that it's going to get you there and back.
Absolutely. So talking a little bit more deeply about the 70 series, on the 78, how do you normally like to build out storage, living area? What are some of the key things that you have found works in the 78?
So you've got quite a limited space. Okay, so you're trying to maximize everything in there. So it starts off by looking at saying that the biggest component that's often going to determine what you need to the layout is your fridge, your water. Okay, now on this particular vehicle, as I said, we've got water tanks we've designed, and they're in the cavities. So we've taken any water that would normally sit inside the car or under the car, and we've kept that space just for living.
So you've removed those side panels, and you've put water tanks in the gap.
In there.
That's clever.
Yeah, they've worked well.
That's incredibly clever.
The rotor molds were designed by a friend of mine who owns a company who builds the Troopies for me, and we've basically done he's designed the molds, and we've rotor molded the tanks. So they're filled from the rear quarters on each side.
Unbelievable.
So both tanks can carry 25 liters, and then the plastic tank under the back carries another 50 liters.
And do you connect the two together, or do you have two fills?
So you can isolate them. It means you can keep 25 liters separate, and you can sort your water out, or you can, and they'll feed from the bottom tank. And then what we've done with that, so that the basic process looks, when I sat down and started the design process, it was like I built a lot of Troopies. What really worked and what didn't work?
Yeah.
One of the things I felt people got wrong was using the space carefully, that you can access the space. Okay, so when I say that, I mean, you've got to, if you're going to cook, you want to be able to get what you need for cooking. If you're going to get your recovery gear, you don't want to open up the whole back of the car to get your recovery gear, because you make yourself vulnerable. So where am I going to store everything? So everything I took the list of all the kits that we normally put in and figured out, where would we put everything? It doesn't help to build a vehicle and then give someone a checklist of what to go and buy.
Sure.
And they sit there for hours trying to figure out how they're going to pack it.
Yeah.
And then it becomes a nightmare. So we figured out and said, okay, where is everything going to go? Now, ergonomically, when you sit in the back of the truck, remember, we've cut the roof off this truck, and we've put on a roof which pops up to create a tent sleeping area. And when the roof pops up, so does the floor go up, so you can actually stand in the vehicle when you're not sleeping.
Sure.
Equally, you can put the floor down, and you've still got a space at the back that you can climb up to the top, or come down, sit down, and make a cup of coffee in the tent.
Sure.
Okay. Now, the floor...
You have an early riser in the crew?
No, it's your wife saying, honey, can you make me a cup of coffee? Sure.
Yeah, that's right.
So the other thing that I found is that people build the storage too high, and it's a small space. And if you know ergonomically, or should I say aesthetically, in a small space, you need to keep things low. So we try and keep as much light into the vehicle, so you can keep the windows.
Yeah, sure.
All the windows, some of them you can add gull wings that you can open up fully, so you're looking for access.
And that also creates this forced lower center of gravity too.
It does, yeah. And then you look and say, well, okay, where do we put a fridge?
Yeah.
Okay, now most people want to put the fridge right at the back door. So I've divided the vehicle up and go, if this is my kitchen area, now, one of our designs, the left-hand side pulls out, and we've got a cooker, and we've got a cutlery drawer, and a chopping board, and that's your cooking station. You can equally take a multi-fuel cooker, and you can go and put it on the table. On the left-hand side, we've got a table that folds down, which allows you to cook outside. Okay, so you can cook outside there, You can come into the vehicle. Very few people cook in the vehicle. Remember,
because
cooking in the truck is more for Europe. Eh?
for sure, and the smells that come. You get all the cooking smells.
You got all the cooking, the mess. So generally, and then I'll look and I'll say, well, if you're going to stop and make a coffee, that's the one pleasure I have. And I think often people don't take that time to stop because they don't have quick access to their coffee.
They can't make it happen quickly. Yeah.
So then it's a hassle.
Yeah, sure.
Whereas if you stop, and we've developed a coffee station which actually sits in the back door here.
Clever.
Now you've got a coffee station. You can stop, open one door, drop it down, jet boil, tea, coffee, sugar, milk, and you can have a nice coffee.
Nice.
Okay. When you're closed up in camp, you want to climb into the vehicle. You want to be able to sit there if you wanted to do any work, and you want to be able to sit in there if you needed to for bad weather. So inclement weather, that's the value. One can sleep, one can sit down, watch a movie, do some work.
Yeah.
So you're trying to make this multifunctional vehicle where you live in and out.
Sure.
So a side awning gives you cover over the outside areas on a 270-degree perimeter. So you've got a bit of shade. And then you're looking at how do we do the electrical power. So we went and built a wiring loom for this truck. For security, we added lights on the outside to give perimeter lighting.
Nice.
So at night you can have, once everything's up, you can put perimeter lights on, and animals will stay.
You can see
the lions.
You can see if it's a lion, or whatever. Yeah.
They're sitting just in the shadows waiting. But that's very true. Animals.
Yeah,
it's a good perimeter.
It is, and it just gives you that one little space to go out and use the loo real quick. So,
and that's one fear people have.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God, I'm going to go down. The lions are going to eat me. No, they're not.
Yeah.
So you that's understandable.
At least it's not likely that they will. Leopard, maybe. They're clever.
And they're clever.
They are clever.
But the other thing is you get to see some amazing animals at night. And always say to folk, don't forget that the night animals come out at night.
Yeah.
You've got a light or torch you can put on it. Looks stunning. You can catch these animals right in your campsite.
Yeah, so incredible.
Now, what folk don't think about is sometimes you've got to remove all this kit. And in these designs, we've got air heaters, we've got hot water heaters running off the diesel. But what if you have to take this all out?
Yeah.
So when it's built, the floor goes down, the floor gets fitted to the floor of the vehicle, and then everything else gets fitted to the floor that you can quickly take out.
Yeah.
It's modular.
Nice.
So it's important. So, the focus is to modular. So when we sat down and did the designs and cleverly designed everything, the idea was, can we build it in a way that we can modularly do it with a few offerings? Because the biggest challenge you have with any vehicle that you build up custom is that it doesn't get tested until you test it, because it's a brand new build.
Sure.
It's like a house. You go into your brand new house and you test everything and hopefully it all works. And if it doesn't, the guy comes back and tweaks it. If you build the same house 7 times, by the 7th rendition, you've got it pretty much right.
That's right.
So that's exactly what we've done here.
Yeah, and it just looks fantastic. The Molly panel for attaching small items on the back, and it just looks, and the floor looks very durable. Yeah, just what a neat setup you've got in there.
Yeah.
And then, what do you normally like to do for tires? What's your current go-to on a vehicle like this?
It's more about what's available, and on the Troopies, the 1H it's not a massively big engine. So, and you're also looking at what's available. So 265, 75, 16. We keep to the 16-inch rims because they're available.
Yep.
We look at what some people will go 285s because they just look a bit better.
Yeah.
Okay. There's always a compromise.
I think that the 265, 75, 16 has a lot of merit. We ran the 255, 85, 16 mud terrains because we knew we were going to be in so many different conditions in our travels around the world. But I'm also seeing that a lot of the newer vehicles, even in Africa, they're on a 17-inch wheel now. Yeah. So they're a 265 70 R17.
Yeah. The thing is, you got more on a 16-inch rim. So you remember, this is a very basic vehicle.
Sure. Yeah.
So if I have a problem and I go into a hunter's camp or a lodge or something, they'll have to have a help or lend me a tire.
That's
and
right.
a rim. So we're always looking at what if scenario and how can we resolve that?
Yeah, for sure.
And yes, it's not wrong to put taller, narrower tires on.
Yeah.
It's in fact they're really good. They go good.
But how do you replace them?
That's what you got to look at. If you need a tire,
we were lucky because we had. Well, at one point we had 8 spares. So between the 4 vehicles, well, I didn't have a single flat in all of the travels, but yeah.
Look, the mud terrains are great tires. Generally, if someone's going into East Africa and around, I won't use them.
Yeah, you just don't need it.
Mud terrain's a great tire, as you said, for what you use. They get noisy.
Yeah, very noisy. And fuel economy goes down.
Yeah.
So yeah, for West Africa, I think it makes sense, but for definitely. East Africa. Not so much. And for most of the world, an all-terrain is just a great choice.
It's a good choice.
Less fatigue on the driver and better wet weather stopping, handling. Yes. If you get into ice and snow, they perform better than a mud terrain does.
When you talked about what are the weak points on the vehicles, again, one of the safety issues is upgrading the brakes.
Yeah.
And that's something that gets done on all of our trucks.
Yeah.
We'll upgrade them. And you've got a number of options you can do to upgrade the brakes. So I think the important parts is making sure you've gone through the weak points of the vehicle, making sure you've got the safety elements right in the suspension, the tire choice, the upgrades that you need to put in the suspension and get that right. To get the weight in a position where the vehicle feels comfortable to drive, and then again, is the layout where you can access everything. So it's a very fine balance.
It is a fine balance, isn't it? So you've probably built hundreds of 70 series Land Cruisers in your 30 years of this profession. What's your favorite model 70 series? What's your favorite?
The favorite has to, and all of them are built. I mean, the 78 is really my favorite.
Yeah.
I think I just love the fact that if you want to, you can climb in the back, you can beat a waterhole. So it's got, for me, the most amount of flexibility.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that's probably the real option, that I can sleep in the truck without the roof.
Yeah.
I can climb in the back of the waterhole.
And if you were to give people advice on what are the top 3 things that they need to make sure that they do for that 78, what's the top 3 items that they need to
on any model of 78?
Yeah.
I think get the suspension right. I've seen too many people with, the suspension's not right, and choose a suspension that you can get spares and components for. That's really important. Your layout, you need to give a lot of thought to your layout.
Yeah.
Because you spend a lot of money on building the interior. And it doesn't have to have everything. It can be a simple layout with just boxes to start.
Sure.
And I think often
it might be a great place to start, because then you can move the boxes around and say, actually, I like it this way, or I like it.
Or just to get a feel. So I think often people start down the journey of building their vehicle from all the pictures they've seen, from all the Pinterest photographs. How many people bring me Pinterest photographs and they actually haven't got enough experience?
Sure.
So I go with less.
Yeah.
And add to it as you go along if you need it. The safety critical stuff you have.
For sure.
So that's the second thing I'd say is really important.
So if someone is ready to build their 70 series to go around the world, how do they find out about you? How do they contact you?
So if you go onto my website, paulmarsh4x4.com, they can connect with me. And what we normally always set up is a way to have an initial discussion. I'll consult to them, and then I'll project manage the entire build using companies that I have endorsed.
Yeah.
And then what we'll do is we'll make sure that the car can be from purchase to when they go with training, so they feel confident to go. That's the aim of what we
I've used your help in the past. We built the 78 series for Greg and me to take to Antarctica, and we somehow managed to shoehorn some 38s on there for a short period of time. So I've seen your work in action. I've seen your industrious nature and your ability to pull together key suppliers and support to get projects done on time. So I'm grateful for the work that you do, and I'm grateful for your time today. The 70 series is what I like to call a pinnacle overland vehicle. There are very few, and that is one of them. So it's something, and now that even in North America, they're 25 years old, many of them. So you can
So now you can start importing.
you can start importing them. So don't be afraid of a 25-year-old.
Well, I think that's the vehicle to look for because we've done a few.
Exactly.
Find one, rebuild it, and take it back home.
Off you go.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you for your time.
Thanks
as well.
for the time.
Thank you.
Appreciate
really
it,
good
Paul.
to catch up again.
And we thank you all for listening. Go take a look at that 70 series, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you.